Friends, this is a clock prophecy update for August 17, 2019. As I've said from the beginning, dates discussed in these messages mark our place on the clock and are not dates of predicted fulfillment. Their purpose is to help guide us in an understanding of current events as they pertain to Bible prophecy and to watch as Jesus instructed. Our passage out of the black ring on the clock before the events of Revelation 13 means we may be moving past an 80-year generation in which all or most of the events of Revelation occur by the fall of 2020. This may well be the most important clock prophecy update released so far, so let's review what Jesus said and examine how God, through Scripture, is guiding us forward. In Matthew 24:32-34, Jesus says the following, "Now learn a parable of the fig tree. When his branch is yet tender, and putteth forth leaves, you know that summer is nigh. So likewise ye, when ye shall hear all these things, know that it is near, even at the doors. Verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass, till all these things be fulfilled." Notice that he does not say that the generation will conclude with the fulfillment of all things. Rather, he says it will not pass before all of these things are fulfilled, which means that they could be fulfilled before the conclusion of a generation. Jesus uses the Greek word genea, which in Strong's Concordance is G1074, meaning a period of time equal to as little as 30 years, or the length of a human lifespan, meaning that it could refer in this passage to the lifespan of those who are alive to see the events described by Jesus in this passage. Now, Jesus further said that the first day of a final generation would be marked by the rebirth of Zion, which is the city of Jerusalem. Remember that when he cursed the fig tree a year into his ministry, it was a prophecy for the destruction of Jerusalem a full generation later. The removal of every stone of Jerusalem's foundation, as Jesus also prophesied in Matthew 24 rather, occurred under Rome's Emperor Hadrian in the year 132 AD, exactly as Jesus said. Also note that this marked the start of the Jewish diaspora, a scattering of the Jews among all nations, described in verses 15 through 19 of the same passage. In fact, much of what Jesus said concerning future events took place a generation after his own death, which is why I believe our current and final generation can be found within the boundaries of this earlier time frame. Since the length of a genea in Greek is not a prescribed period of time, however, we must trust God for his guidance in our study of his word during this period of watch. See the introduction of my book to understand the significance of May 11, 1942, the critical date in modern Jewish history consistent with the prophetic key given to Daniel to mark the start of our final generation. Now let's look at the period of time between the Lord's death and the final prophesied destruction of Jerusalem, which occurred nearly 2,000 years ago. Subtracting the year 30 AD from the year 132 AD, we arrive at a period of approximately 101 years. We are calculating 101 years to reflect the partial years consumed by both events, and because actual dates can't be established with complete certainty. My own exhaustive study has led me to believe that Christ was born in the year 3 BC, thus the Lord's age of 33 years at the time of his death in 30 AD. I have mentioned the importance of the number 101 for me personally in an earlier update, but in this message, I want to explore another calculation that pertains to the birth and maturity of the manchild in Revelation chapters 7, 12, and 14. In part 2, I will explain, or that's actually part 2 on the website. I've decided to make this one video rather than dividing it into 2 parts. So what follows is how the time frame that Jesus prophesied for Jerusalem's destruction in 132 AD, a period of about 101 years, is also the duration of our final generation before it is shortened, as Jesus promised to do in Matthew 24:22, saying, "But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened." I expect, in fact, that our final generation to be reduced by a period of exactly 13 years, as I'm about to make clear. In a past message, I shared a personal revelation regarding the hour and minute of my birth, on the date of my birth, where it fell on the clock in 2014, and where John describes the birth of the man-child in Revelation chapter 12, verse 2. I did not delve deeply into this at the time because I didn't understand why it happened or what it meant. Now that we have moved outside the black ring on the clock, however, I have been led to share more about it and to open a final chapter of Revelation into the clock prophecy. First, let's take a look at the math. From the start date of the clock prophecy on December 17, 2010, adding the incremental value of 194 verses, which takes us to the start of Revelation chapter 12, we arrive at the date April 10, 2014. You can see exactly how this looks by referring to the website, to this very update on the website, the update for August. This shows that on April 10, 2014, we entered Revelation chapter 12, in which a woman wearing a crown with 12 stars is about to give birth to a man-child. Historically, we view this man-child as representing Jesus, who was saved from the diabolical plot of King Herod, who sought to murder him. We also know this passage to be a prophecy for the man-child found in Revelation chapter 7, in which John describes a group of 144,000 Hebrew male children taken in equal numbers from all the tribes of Israel. Let's quote that passage and read it together. Revelation chapter 7, verse 4 states, "And I heard the number of them which were sealed, and there were sealed 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel." The word for children here is the Greek hues, which is G5207, meaning a firstborn male, and John further amplifies this description when he describes their birth using the term man-child in Revelation chapter 12, verse 5. Quote, "And she brought forth a man-child who was to rule all nations." John writes in Revelation 2:26 that Christ will rule the earth with those to whom he gives power over the nations, and not by himself. I believe this points to the 144,000 as the army God is preparing now to take over the nations. The 144,000 Hebrews are further described in Revelation chapter 14, verse 4. Quote, "These are they which were not defiled with women, for they are virgins." It should be obvious that an infant must grow to sexual maturity before such a trait can be meaningful. Since the word virgin does not apply to newborns, we must review how Hebrew culture defines the nature of infant males as they move from pre-adolescence into adulthood. In Jewish law, Hebrew males reach manhood at 13 years of age, at which point they attain bar mitzvah. This is the age of accountability. This threshold of emotional and spiritual maturity is marked by a religious ceremony dating back thousands of years. Because of this, we know that a Hebrew male cannot become a virgin until he has reached the age of 13. Please be sure that you fully grasp these points, as we are about to make a quantum leap forward in our understanding of the present timeline. On one of the earliest pages of this website, which you can find by clicking the clock image from the home page, you will find a list of several key dates archived to that page since this website's original upload and publication in 2010. The first date listed there is April 6, 2012. This date was a result of measuring time from an instruction that I received audibly, which I did not record as such in these messages. The date itself, however, has been archived here for many years, and now I need to share exactly how it came about for the purpose of today's message. The words spoken to me on the evening of October 14, 2006 were as follows, and I'm quoting what I actually heard spoken to me. 13 days out of 2,000 days. That was it. I had not yet experienced the visitation in 2010, nor had I yet received the audible message in 2008 referring to the importance of 1942 in Jewish history. At any rate, the next morning I calculated ahead 2,000 days and found the result to be the night before Good Friday in 2012, which, because of time zone differences, of course, would mean that actually by the time I heard these words, it was in fact already Good Friday in Israel. Since this fell just one day before Passover in 2012, I recorded the result as Good Friday, as you will see in my calculation at the website. April 6, 2012. This date in 2012 took on added meaning for me after the visitation in 2010 because it fell squarely into the clock of the 4 night watches between the 10th of Tevet in 2010 and late 2016 near, but not on, trumpets. In fact, for nearly 2 years, I believe this might be a marker in time for the rapture or for the rise of the Antichrist, or both. The portion of the message referring to 13 days remains such a mystery to me that I made no effort to discuss it at all, which is why I published only the future date based on the second portion as shown in the measurement above, or at the website. I have waited all these years to understand the significance of 13 days, and I believe the time has now come for the full meaning of those words to be realized. As you know, I teach that the seals began to be opened in the summer of 2012, and that Passover in 2012 was the final Passover before Christ began his conquest of the nations, as stated in Revelation 11:15. At the website, this corresponding update provides a list of the evidence to show that Christ has already begun his assault on the nations. So please see the full message there. Now, with the arrival of Passover in 2012, 2,000 days after October 4th, 2006, we could see that a dual layer of prophetic fulfillment began even as the first watch on the clock of the 4 night watches came to an end, just weeks before the arrival of Psalms 40, verse 7 on the clock in early August. Let's read that verse together. Behold, I come. In the volume of the book it is written of me. This verse, beyond all doubt, is a prophecy for the return of Christ. And incredibly, it is mathematically linked to the arrival of Revelation chapter 6, verse 1 on the clock, the very verse that describes the rider on the white horse whose conquest begins with the opening of the first seal. In other words, these two verses, written almost 1,000 years apart, fell on the clock at the same time, and the mathematical proof of this can be found in the first monograph in chapter 3 of my book. I want to share with you why I believe that the words 13 days out of 2,000 days also points to a longer period of time and a final layer of prophetic fulfillment with the conclusion of 13 years out of 2,000 years, and how this will bring us to the complete takeover of the nations by a fully developed manchild. As stated earlier, my time of birth at 5:41 a.m. on my birthday in 2014 fell on the clock exactly where the woman delivers the manchild in Revelation 12, verse 2. The exact date was the 17th of April. Obviously, I'm not currently 5 years old, and I do not believe myself to be part of the manchild. Rather, God has provided us with a marker in time to show the actual year in which the 144,000 were given birth. I now understand the words 13 days out of 2,000 days to mean 13 days subtracted out of 2,000, or rather 13 years subtracted out of 2,000 years, in order to find the part of the timeline devoted to the man-child as he moves from infancy into adulthood, just 1,260 days before the bodily return of Christ. By adding 13 years to my date of birth in 2014, we arrive at the year 2027, which I believe to be the year the man-child will be caught up to God when the 144,000 have reached 13 years of age in April of that year. As you know, the clock prophecy shows the catching up of the man-child between the second and third trumpets of the seventh seal, indicated by the same mathematical matrix that shows the head wound, the rise of the Antichrist, and the destruction of Rome. It is because so many events are linked to such a tight matrix using the divine structure of the Bible that we refer to this as critical mass on the clock. As for the removal of the man-child, Revelation chapter 12 states that after the man-child is caught up in verse 5, the woman will be shielded from the face of the serpent for a period of 1,260 days, or 42 months. John refers to this same period of time following the head wound event just 8 verses later. Note that the clock has identified Barack Obama as the first beast of Revelation, the individual whose facsimile or copy or look-alike will be promoted by the Antichrist in order to compensate for his near-fatal injury, making it possible for him to appear and speak in public. This is why the image of the beast is given power to speak in Revelation 13. You can read more about this in my article on the mark of the beast from the main page of the website. These 1,260 days in Revelation 12 and 13 are the same 1,260 days, the same 42 months, and the same one half of Daniel's 70th week, as explained in chapter 4 of my book. In that chapter, I show how Jesus himself divided the 70th week by the period of his ministry to the Jews before his own death. If the man-child is caught up in the spring of 2027, that means many will endure another 1,260 days before the final round of harvest in late 2030. This final harvest is the rapture of those who are alive and remain at the last trump, an event prophesied by the Apostle Paul in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 17. Read my article on the four-part harvest to understand why Jesus used 4 distinct clock times in his parable of the vineyard in Matthew 20, and how this explains everything in the Bible that pertains to the rapture. In fact, it will explain to you why the so-called pre-trib and post-trib rapture doctrines of a one-day universal rapture at the start or at the end of a 7-year tribulation are not what the Bible teaches. Instead, there are 4 harvest groups, several of which will overlap since they occur throughout a period of at least 1,260 days. The second harvest group, a gathering of summer wheat, may well occur as late as the 6th trumpet, and if the 2030 endpoint is correct, as early as the year 2028. I believe this harvest group will be the largest of the 3 groups to experience a catching up, possibly affecting tens of millions of believers. Let's review the math that shows the relationship between the years 2027 and 2014. Keeping in mind that the Lord's ministry to the Jews most likely began in 27 AD when he was baptized in the Jordan. Adding to the year 27 AD, a 2,000-year period takes us obviously to 2027. And subtracting 13 years for the growth of the man-child brings us back to the year 2014. As you can see, a period of 13 years can be subtracted from the larger period of 2,000 years to arrive at the year of the man-child's birth in our time. The word spoken to me 13 years ago this fall points to 2027 as the year in which the man-child will reach adulthood. Now let's look at the evidence that 2030 will be the year Jesus re-enters Jerusalem 42 months after the catching of the manchild in 2027. We would expect this to take place 1,260 days after the 144,000 Hebrew children have reached 13 years of age in April of that year. Since this convergence on the clock occurred on the 17th of April in 2014, we add 1,260 days to April 17, 2027, which brings us to September 28, 2030. This date in 2030 is exactly the first day of the Jewish New Year in 2030. The Feast of Tabernacles falls exactly 14 days later. This may well mark the arrival of Messiah in fulfillment of the final feast, known to the Jews as Sukkot. The critical date during Sukkot in 2030 may be October the 12th, which is the Sabbath on which Tabernacles begins. Since the period of harvest depicted in Revelation chapter 6, verse 6, using the 4 key crops of Israel, may not be confined to just 42 months, however, we must keep watch for the possibility that we may reach critical mass on the clock at any time. We will discuss how the timeline is moving forward as a result of current events in a future message. Please print the update from the website and share it with your pastor, your friends, and others in the body of Christ. Also share this video, and please hit the like button and subscribe in order to keep abreast of how this message develops. God bless as you continue to hear what the Spirit is saying to the churches. Behold, I come quickly. This is Peter John Brandel.